Good evening, members. The meeting is now being broadcast. So thank you all for coming. We have received apologies from Councillor Pickering, hence I'm chairing the meeting in her absence. Do we have any other apologies?
We have no other apologies, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that's item 1 on the agenda. Item 2 is minutes of the previous meeting, which have been circulated. Are there any questions of accuracy about those minutes? If not, are you content that we approve them as a true and correct record? That's proposed by Councillor Barnard, seconded by... Right, okay, that's good. By Councillor Forster. Okay, so item 3, declarations of interest and party whip. Does any member have a declaration to make? No? That's all good, thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is urgent items of business. Clerk, have we been notified of any?
There are no urgent items of business.
Thank you. Item 5, public participation.
I'm not aware of any public participation requests.
Or indeed any members of the public in the gallery. Fine, thank you very much. Item 6, then we move on to the substantive part of the agenda, is the budget update. So, Councillor Neil or Stuart, who's going to talk to this item?
Thank you and good evening. There were quite extensive papers were published with the agenda. However, I'm conscious that they are quite complex and detailed, so I've therefore produced a presentation which summarises the key points which I plan to share. And it also includes a little chart which isn't in the papers on the agenda, which I think helps explain the fair funding changes as they were put out in the consultation in the summer. So I'm going to cover this evening where we are in the current year and then look ahead to both the funding, spending and the prospects that we face in the years ahead. So some of it will not be completely news to you, but it sets out where we are in all of those areas. So in terms of the current year, we report the monitoring information on a quarterly basis formally through the corporate performance overview reports. So this committee has seen the Q1 position, and that presented an underspend of £2.3 million, but once we include emerging issues and risks, which we also track at the corporate management team, at that point then it was heading for a potential 410,000 overspend. That was at the end of Q1. The most recent information that has been to the corporate management team in October indicated an improvement in the overall position, but a deterioration in the headline underspend. So 1.9 million underspend and still a 325,000 underspend even once we take into account those emerging issues and risks. So therefore it's a much better position than we've looked at the committee in the last couple of years. You'll remember we were facing potential overspends of £3-4 million in each of the last 2 years. So therefore the fact that we're projecting an underspend rather than overspend at this point is really helpful. Of course, we can't be complacent about it. There's still a lot of time to go between now and the year end, and it doesn't take many expensive social care placements to knock that position off track, and that can happen. It's a risk that we always face. But we are going into the autumn and winter period in a better position, so that is helpful. What is not so helpful is that the government is planning to change its funding allocations for local authorities from 2026-27. So there was a very detailed set of proposals published in June by the government, and the responses to that consultation were required in August. So the key elements of the changes are that the business rates retention system, which has been in place since 2013, is going to be fully reset. The implications of that is that any growth that has been secured and retained by individual areas since 2013 will be lost. So it goes back down to everyone starts again from zero in 2026-27, and the gains that were allocated to individual authorities are part of the overall funding that's going to be allocated across the board from that year. Alongside that, there's proposed to be a significant simplification of grants. That's going to be helpful, really, I think, for in large part because we have struggled, like all authorities, with the sheer number of different grants coming through, the administration around those, and to be frank, at times the struggle to spend them and the very tight timescales between when they're allocated and when the money has to be put out the door. So that's probably helpful, and some of that funding goes into general funding, but the impact on us I will come to shortly. Key change is that the funding formula is also going to be significantly changed. It will be updated to reflect current data. That's not unhelpful. It's hard to argue that population data, deprivation data from 10, 15 years ago continues to be accurate. It clearly isn't, so therefore the government does propose to update that. And within that, it does also propose to give a much higher weighting to deprivation. Now, clearly, Bracknell Forest is not a deprived area in general terms. We have some pockets, but in overall terms, we are not. So that's not going to be favourable to councils like us and our neighbours generally. There will be a 3-year phasing in period, so we won't see an immediate change to the future funding. That will happen over a 3-year period, and I'll talk you through on the next slide an illustration of what that looks like. But within all of those changes, the government expects that every upper tier authority will increase council tax by 4.99%. It's part of their calculation of core spending power, so how much money we have available to spend. So it's not in addition to, it is part of that, as I will illustrate on the next slide. So this might be a little bit hard to follow, but we'll hopefully navigate our way through it. So starting at the left-hand side, our spending power, which is the sum of government grant and council tax, in 2024-25 was £115 million. So moving from 24-25 to 25-26, there was an increase expected and actually implemented of a 4.99% council tax increase, so that increases the spending power. We also had a small increase in general grant because that normally goes up for inflation, and we had an increase also in specific grant in 25-26. So the combination of those changes were to increase the spending power by around £7 million in that year. And that's pretty consistently what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, around a £7 million increase in spending power every year. So, looking ahead to 26-27, if the fair funding proposals are implemented as they were published in draft over the summer, we will see the reduction, the £12 million reduction for Bracknell Forest in the retained business rates. So that takes our spending power down. We also see a further reduction in specific grants of around the same figure, another £12 million, because that's part of the redistribution reallocation. So we get some of that back in the figure above. So we lose 12 million plus 12 million, that's 24. The government assumes that we will increase council tax by 4.99%, that generates £5.5 million. And the difference to keep us in an equilibrium position is we expect to get an extra £19 million of general grant. So big ups, big downs, but the key bit is that rather than the spending power going up, like it did from 24-25 to 25-26, it stays constant. It's essentially Bracknell Forest is pretty much on the funding floor for that period. Look forward to 27-28. We're still not in the position which has been calculated as Bracknell Forest's underlying allocation of grants, so therefore we will lose a tranche of that in 27-28, broadly equivalent to the amount that the government assumes we will generate in extra council tax from a 4.99% increase. So again, one balancing the other, keeping us in a cash flat spending power situation for that year. And the same happens in 2028-29. So by the end of 28-29, we've lost a significant amount of grant, but as far as the current indications show, that we're then on essentially what our ongoing grant position will be. So from 29-30 onwards, we should get back to a position where we get a very small inflation increase in general grant, and we also get to keep the benefit of a council tax increase if that's put in place. So you'll see we saw an increase between 24-25 and 25-26. We should see an increase from 28-29 to 29-30, but we've got the big problem years in between when we will not see under the government's proposals, any change to Bracknell Forest's ability to spend. So there was obviously a series of responses put into the consultation in the summer. There was a political response, which was a letter which all parties signed up to go into government, and that essentially called for a real terms funding increase every year for local authorities with social care and education responsibilities, given that inevitably every year we see demand pressures in those services, and therefore to expect any council to cope with those with no funding increase whatsoever feels rather difficult. So that was the key tenet of our political response, and that was supported by a detailed technical response which set out for government officials what the impact on Bracknell Forest would be if they did implement the proposals, which is obviously very significant. So since that point, Bracknell Forest has also joined with Wokingham. Wokingham have been calling consistently for a 4% increase as the minimum guaranteed increase in upper tier authorities. So that's very close to our sense of a real terms increase with inflation at 3.8. So we've joined with them in supporting their campaign, as have other councils. What we are seeing, however, and you will be reading in the local government press, that every other group of authorities is also pressing their claim for better treatment through the fair funding proposals. So that will continue for the time being until the proposals are actually published, and quite possibly thereafter, because it's one of those strange situations where I think there's going to be very few councils who are going to be really happy about the outcome of the fair funding consultation, because the ones who think they should gain significantly are unlikely to gain significantly, at least for a period of time, and the ones like us who lose are going to lose significantly. So it's going to be a very difficult reaction, I think, for the government to take from local authorities generally. So in terms of where we are at the moment, there has been a release of data. The updated data on population and deprivation was released last week, I think it was. And alongside that, the government announced that it was minded to take into account housing costs in an assessment of deprivation. That was something put forward as a proposal very much by London boroughs. Believe it or not, in the London boroughs, many of them are due to have even worse funding settlements in Bracknell Forest over the next few years. So that's a means of potentially giving them some protection against that, because housing costs in London are clearly very high. They're quite high in Bracknell Forest, but unfortunately the way the numbers look, those changes are not going to have any material impact on us, is how it looks. So the government policy statement, which will give us an outline of what their approach will be to the funding settlement from 26-27 onwards, was initially supposed to be published at the end of September. Then it was the end of October, start of November, so I was expecting to be able to give you an update on that this evening, but the latest information we've had is it's likely to be next week. No guarantees, but we will see. It might well be next week. So at that point, we'll understand roughly how the cake is proposed to be cut up between individual authorities. The autumn budget, which the Chancellor will announce on the 26th November, will determine the size of the cake, which will be split between the authorities, because she will be setting out a lot of measures, and you'll have seen a huge amount of speculation around what they might be, but she will be setting out spending plans for public services over the next few years, so we'll understand the overall size of the funding available at that point. As always, it looks as though we're set to receive the actual numbers for Bracknell Forest from the government just before Christmas. Really unhelpful. The point is made every year is that does not help our planning. It means that we have to publish a consultation on a budget before we actually know for certain what our funding is going to be. It's mad. It shouldn't happen that way, but it has happened that way for many, many years. So it kind of is what we have had to get used to. Another thing that's of significant consideration for us is the SEND reforms. They were supposed to be announced, there was supposed to be an announcement around SEND reforms in the autumn. The government has deferred that till next spring, probably. Understandably, probably, because there are some really complex issues at play there, not least things like dedicated schools grant deficits, which are rising to several £billion across the country. They're not quite at that level in Bracknell Forest, but they're £25 million and rising by about £8-9 million a year is where we are around it. So a significant issue for us, and it's linked to what we potentially look to in future years around the earmarked reserves, because we currently have £23 million as part of our safety valve deal set aside in the earmarked reserve to cover what was felt to be a reasonable share of the deficit as it's predicted at the time. The reality is the deficit is now going to be higher than it was, but we have still at the moment got those reserves set aside to help mitigate the impact. So we've dealt so far in the presentation with the funding side of things. Now going to flip to the spending side. So we will inevitably see increases in spending on inflation, because pay goes up every year, prices go up every year, particularly for social care providers. They always expect more. We will increase our fees and charges by an inflationary amount as well, which partly mitigates it, but it will be a big figure which will be added to our budget. It always is. Alongside that, we face demand pressures every year, not in Bracknell Forest to the same extent that many councils do. I have to say we've actually been doing pretty well relatively in terms of managing demand in the social care services, but there will be increases in demand inevitably. And home to school transport is an issue which is becoming an increasing concern for us. It's not been quite as high as it has been in other authorities up until recently, but it is now looking as though it's the impact of all the new placements out of borough for SEND pupils is having an impact on the transport costs. So we also face, looking ahead, new legislation. So the big one which we've been looking at in recent years is simpler recycling, about the curbside collection of glass. So the council has committed to do it, but it's very costly, over £1 million to actually do that scheme. So that's coming. And we will look also at what we need to spend to keep our assets in a reasonable state, so making sure that we're maintaining them properly. And there are quite often some capital schemes which come forward to enhance assets, to build new ones such as Bridgewell. So they are all pressures that we will see on our budget. But it's quite clear that if you see any annual increase in spending, then that's not going to be matched by an increase in resources if the fair funding proposals are brought in, because we're not going to see any. So that will inevitably lead to a significant budget gap in 26, 27 and the years beyond. So this table is an extract from the September Cabinet report, so I haven't updated the numbers since then. It's based on, I think, reasonable assumptions around what the impact of pay will be. It assumes, based on recent years, that our underlying position is that we will see net pressures, so pressures exceeding savings by around £2.5 million a year. That's the average of what we've had in the past few years. It's not based on any specific numbers for 26, 27 yet. And it builds in the impact of the funding changes that I've just gone through. So if you combine those things together, you see a gap by 2028-29 rising to close to £19 million. That's a really, really significant gap. If you compare that with what we were seeing this time last year, the gap was around £6 million. The difference is the fair funding reforms. So in terms of options, officers are looking through everywhere, in all honesty, to bring proposals forward for councillors to consider as the budgets are set. There are really two ways of balancing budget. One is to look at recurring savings, which do help the medium-term sustainability. So that's an area where we inevitably look. So transformational change is something that we will take forward. We have done for many years. Efficiency savings, there are not as many as there used to be, but I think it's hard to ever say that you're 100% efficient as an organisation, particularly because technological advances do mean that you can do things differently. So we will have some of those. We can also look at additional income from fees and charges, so both in terms of an inflationary increase and also any new ones that we can look to bring in are helpful to the ongoing position. If those aren't enough, then inevitably you have to start looking at service reductions. So what standards do we have for the services that we have in place? We might have to look at reducing those standards, and we might also have to look at some service cuts. Not something that Bracknell Forest has had to face particularly over the past 10, 15 years. We've had some, but we've been largely protected from them by the approach that we've taken overall. But many councils across the country have been in a position where they've been cutting services for quite some time. And the other one, which is referred to in the Cabinet paper from September, is about alternative service delivery models. So there are plenty of examples within Bracknell Forest and elsewhere where councils do work creatively in partnership with voluntary organisations, community groups, town and parish councils to look at different ways of delivering services so that they can be retained without necessarily being such a call on the resources of this council. So those are all things which are being explored and will be explored both for 26, 27 and for future years. However, if those aren't enough, the council does still have a legal duty to set a balanced budget each year. So therefore, if the spending is still greater than the resources from grant and council tax, we will need to look at using one-off resources to actually get to that balanced budget position to meet that legal duty. So in terms of options around that, the council has around £10 million available in earmarked reserves and general reserves. And we do have the £23 million for safety valve with a question over will that be needed in the future if the government takes a different approach to funding the DSG deficit. We may not have to have that sat for that particular purpose. It may be flexible. Something that we've also looked at in recent years is we have used some asset disposals to support our flexible use of capital receipt strategy. Now, the rules around what you can use capital receipts on are pretty tight. It can only be for transformation activities until you get into the position where you're in exceptional financial circumstances, in which case the rules are pretty much off. And there are an increasing number of councils, as you know, in that. There was over 30 councils received exceptional financial support going into the 25-26 year. And within the last couple of weeks alone, a further 3 councils have indicated that they are in conversations with the department around looking at that. So North Somerset, Shropshire and East Sussex County Council. So many councils heading for that situation. We're not there yet, but if the fair funding proposals come in, we will inevitably be taken closer to it. So in terms of what happens next, Councillor Neil will cover this in a little bit more detail in her presentation, but the draft budget proposals for 26-27 and potentially some themes that we might explore for future years beyond that need to be published on the 8th of December. There will be the 6-week consultation period then, and Council will be asked to support what the final budget is, what that looks like at the end of February. At that point, Chair, if you're depressed enough, then I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Councillor Neil, is there anything you wish to add before I move into questions?
No, not now. Thank you, Chair. I think if we cover Stuart's section, then I'll come on to my bit afterwards, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, the floor is open to questions. I saw Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, and thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. And if what I'm about to ask is going to be covered in more detail later, then happy to hold it. So, budget's very complex, great presentation, setting out what we've got. From my understanding, we sort of essentially have 3 blocks, don't we? We sort of have in the region about 85 million of what we spend at the moment, which is social care related and things like that. We have about 9 million, which is waste collection, things like that. And maybe sort of then on top of that, is it about sort of 12 million if my sums are right or something like that, which is what we spend on everything else. So as a commission, if we're looking at as proposals come forward, where are we going to, you said we're looking everywhere, but given that we've got demand-led services, are there some particular areas that we're going to need to focus in on? Because I know it's what we want to be, this is the government doing this, so that, have I got it right in my thinking? Because presumably that 9 million on waste we can't do a huge amount with. We might be able to contain it by more recycling and things. But it seems to me that adult social care, children's social care is quite difficult probably to find significant savings. So is that sort of leaning to other sort of service areas that we provide?
If I may, Chair, this is drifting into Councillor Neil's
that's
presentation.
Okay, so more than happy to wait at that stage.
But just briefly, yes, we do have demand-led services which are difficult to drive savings through immediately, but that doesn't mean there aren't any savings anywhere. So we're looking at things like how we commission care, working with other partners in the local area who are all currently commissioning separately. So we're looking to join that together to try and secure better economies of scale, as an example.
I've got Councillor Mackenzie Boyle, then Councillor Watts, then Councillor Eggleston.
Off the wall, Stuart. Thank you for that presentation. How much do we depend on business rates?
At the moment, we are receiving around £12 million through the business rates retention scheme, which is growth above the baseline. So we will always get a certain amount of business rates, which is the baseline funding level, which is part of the general grant calculation. So we'll get some, but the benefit that we've had over the last number of years has been in the growth in the business rates, which we've managed to retain, and that's been about £12 million in recent years.
Okay, thank you. Supplementary, sir. Thank you very much. Because I'm looking at, for instance, Crowthorne High Street. We want to preserve a vibrant high street. We're losing businesses. And if we lose businesses, we're going to lose residents. If you can imagine what it's going to look like. I don't want to have a high street that is full of vape shops or barbers. We want proper businesses. And if we can't help the businesses along, say give them a year's business rate holiday, I don't know, but we need to support those businesses. How can we do that, Stuart? Or am I just on another planet completely?
You're definitely not in another planet, Councillor Mackenzie Boyle, but it will become more difficult to do that because at the moment we don't offer any kind of incentives or discounts for businesses to come into the borough. Frankly, we haven't had to. They've been quite happy to come and we've been doing well. So we need to think about that in the context of a wider economic strategy, probably linked to the work that's happening across Berkshire with the Prosperity Board, and do it at that level, because that's the kind of level of focus that we need on it. To try and do things locally is quite difficult. If you're working across that bigger economic footprint, there's probably more opportunity to actually look at how you incentivise businesses to come by investing in the infrastructure, etc. But in terms of offering business rates discounts in the financial context that we're heading for, that's going to be very difficult.
It's not a doable thing right now. But can we have it looming there? Can we just always have that thought that we need to retain our businesses?
Thank you for the two supplementaries. Councillor Watts, Councillor Eggleston, then Councillor Hafji.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions, but one is short, I promise. On the joint letter with Wokingham to the Secretary of State, I'm guessing it's too soon for a response yet?
A response was, it was a political letter, so probably better if I asked Councillor Neil to respond to that.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, it keeps coming up that the transport for transporting our central and out of borough is getting higher and higher every year, and is there a more practical way that we can do that, like double-decker school bus? I mean, we have school buses in and out of Brighton all the time, and a double-decker would, for instance, give children enough room to have their own space and enough room for their chaperones to attend as well. Is this practically doable?
I can't answer that specifically, Councillor Watts, but we have just identified that transport is going to be an area of corporate improvement looked at through our business change programme. So we're going to be putting some resource around the whole transport issue to see is there any way in which we can change the routes, change the way in which we commission, etc., to reduce the cost of that. So there are some things that we think we can do. I'm not sure if school buses will be part of that. It depends on the scale. But we do have a few independent special schools which we're sending quite a lot of pupils to, so it may be possible.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Stuart, on the social care funding for children and adults, has the 10-year NHS transformation plan been fed into this? Because we know that social care is going to be relied on more than ever for the quick turnaround in hospitals. So I was wondering, have you had any feedback yet from the government how they're going to help us as a council to fund that?
At the moment, there isn't complete clarity around the future of specific grant funding. The funding that we expect to receive based on the information that we've got from the organisation who's helped us develop the numbers, 'cause it's all very complex and it is already included within these figures. So they have built in some growth in social care funding already within these numbers.
I think Councillor Hafty, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes, please. Yeah. Okay. Actually, I've got a couple of questions. I believe you mentioned that the government policy statement is coming out next week. You got any plans to give us some sort of update or briefing on that when it arrives? And the second one is about, on your future centre spending slide, you talked about simpler recycling being a large expense. I believe we've had payments for the extended producer responsibility, the EPR, and we're going to like to keep getting those over time. Are those, over time, are those likely to cover the expenses we are going to incur through the extra simpler recycling? Thanks.
Through Chair, and answer the first question, yes, clearly councillors will be updated once we understand as best we can what the government's policy statement means. It will not be overnight, so you'll see the policy statement be announced, but it will be as soon as we can get information out beyond that. In terms of the simpler recycling scheme and the EPR money, there are two answers to that. Firstly, yes, the EPR money will cover the cost of the simpler recycling scheme, but the EPR money is already built into our resource projections going ahead. So it's not additional money as far as we're concerned, it's baked in already.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any further questions? If not, there is a recommendation on page 13 of the agenda papers that the Commission notes and comments on the report and the presentation by the Executive Director Resources. If it helps, I can start the ball rolling and lead a discussion. And my comment would be that as far as the residents of Bracknell Forest are concerned, it would appear that the fairer funding, new fairer funding arrangements will not lead to fairness for the residents of Bracknell Forest because of the projections that we've heard from the Executive Director. So do we think that's a reasonable starting point for consideration of recommendations to go forward from this meeting? Councillor Forster.
Sorry, could you give me a bit more about what your thinking was there?
Yes, I mean, as Stuart will know, I've talked about the funding of local government for many years and how I don't believe it's fair or appropriate for the government on the one hand to identify the money they feel they should give to local authorities and on the other hand stop local authorities raising enough money to meet the level of services they deem to be appropriate to satisfy the needs of their residents. So we have on the one hand the government saying this is how much you're going to get in the form of grants, and on the other hand the government saying, and by the way, we're going to cap your spending at 4.95%. So I also think that this is probably, subject to what Stuart thinks, probably the worst proposed financial settlement that I've seen in Bracknell Forest since 2003. So that's why my opening suggestion was that actually I do not believe that the fairer funding proposals for Bracknell Forest will result in fair funding for the residents of Bracknell Forest.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot more sense. So I don't think anyone here would disagree with that. It's appalling. So on top of this, we've also got the unravelling of the send mess that we're in, and that is going to take a long time. We have still got, as part of that story, we have safety valve, which, if I remember correctly, we've still got dramas with the DFE in terms of being able to give us clear direction, particularly around the Bucklers Park School. So we can't move forward there. We've got a new build in Frimley Park, which has a data model which no one has signed off on, which assumes that social care is fixed. And on the top of all this, we've got local government reorganisation that will take the eye off the collective ball for many years to come if that actually happens. And we will start to see what happens with Surrey next door as they go through it. So you've got all this going on simultaneously. We've got the sword of Damocles of safety valve hanging over our head, where as a local authority we are delivering services that a central government should be providing, obviously particularly in education. And we are going to go back to residents again and say, we want another 5% up. And you know, last year we asked for another 5%, and the year before that, and next year we're going to ask for another 5%, and the year after and the year after, while simultaneously cutting services and having this sword of Damocles hanging over our head. We're all residents, we all live here. This is, as you say, appalling. Now, either we're going to have to do something incredibly adventurous, risky. We can see how that's worked out in places like Woking. Or we're going to have to think long and hard about our agreement with the residents about what we provide. So as it stands at the moment, we have all of these things at central government to deal with, all of that, things that are outside of our hand. We have an unfair funding package, and we've got to make the case to residents of how we deal with this.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. It's particularly galling given that Bracknell Forest has always operated on a very prudent financial basis. As you've mentioned, Woking, we've seen Spelthorne, we've seen Slough, we've seen other local authorities. The residents of Bracknell Forest have benefited from very prudent spending, and I think this will become as a nasty shock to them when these hard choices have to be made. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you. And I think sort of hopefully following on and not repeating too much to say, because I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think what we're also seeing is some of the sort of unintended consequences. So reference was made, and Jodie, you did too, effectively home to school transport. We have large numbers of out of borough placements at the moment because we're not providing them at Butlers Park, so we can't actually meet their needs in the borough. So we actually get hit by a cost that we have no control over as a small authority. Safety valve moving on, huge amount going on, and let's not take away from the fact that staff are doing a fantastic job. But overall, what I guess worries me most about going forward, the financial figures we saw at the start just shows, Chair, how well we are in terms of managing our finances in many years. You know, the financial position in year that we're showing out. And I think that our residents are going to be unfairly penalised as a consequence, because, as I know we'll go on to discuss it, the way I look at it is that the vulnerability to where we can save money is potentially in those areas which are most visible and possibly most liked by the vast majority of the population and our residents, because we have so much else that is demand driven. Now, I'm looking forward to hearing how we're going to play this going forward. But fundamentally, the government has sent a fairly clear message centrally, not locally, this is central government, that actually they're kind of dictating what they think we can and cannot spend money on. And I think that's the difficulty, because if you take all the statutory stuff, all the essential stuff, the social care and things like that, and all the waste recycling and all those things, and the single supplier responsibility, we're left with very little which actually matters. And the problem is, of course, if you've then got to balance statutory with non-statutory, that's where it might disproportionately hit. I hope we can find creative and innovative ways to try and minimise that impact, but it's a big ask. The final thing I'd say is that we can't not also consider the sort of macroeconomic situation the country's in, because I remember when things weren't going particularly brilliant in terms of economic growth and when unemployment was rising and things like that last time, we saw a not insignificant blip in increase in terms of demands, particularly on children's services and things like that, because it puts families under additional stress. So what we found in that time that was then replicated during lockdown is you see these potential increases. We've got great staff to try and manage them down, but that feeds into the uncertainty that we have facing that. So it's a difficult situation, but I have a confidence that the team that we've got will do the best that we can. But I think we're going to have to be very open and honest with residents that reserves can only be spent once. You know, you spend, you don't invest. Reserves can only be spent once. There's a graph there that shows things should get better down the line. But it's a brave person to actually say what the economy is going to be doing in 2 years' time, let alone 3 years, 4 years' time. So I think, you know, it's how we balance an uncertainty. And what I'd really like to get a sense from Councillor Neil is a sense of how we're going to use those reserves. You know, the sort of glide path soft landing, how we're going to make sure we've always got something just in case we do that. Because if we don't do that, then we have the worst possible thing where decisions have to be made in year to change services. And that's never good for service users, and it's never good for council. It's something we've not had to do before. So I think that's where I am in this, you know. But I do want to commend our officers, you know, for the work they've done on the budget. Those are some good figures to begin with, and I think that should be acknowledged, that the starting point is possibly better than many.
Okay, we could talk around this all evening, but so therefore, shall we put forward the comment on the report somewhere along the lines of the council, the commission recognises the hard work that the council has put into maintaining prudent finances over many years. We understand the government's fair funding proposals, but we do not believe they represent fairness to the residents of Bracknell Forest. Is that a reasonable summary of what's been said?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Shall we move that? Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you very much, everyone. That then takes us on to the next item, and obviously this is the point where Councillor Neil will have the opportunity to speak. Do you wish to speak first, or is the Executive Director going to speak? Okay. Councillor Neil, the floor is yours.
Over to me now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stuart, for that introduction, and thank you for the discussion so far. I think there's obviously lots to cover this evening. I hadn't banked on needing to use the slides tonight. I sort of assumed that you'd had a chance to look at them as a bit of a pre-read, so I'll just kind of pull out points that we want to raise this evening. But so we've continued to carry a significant risk on our risk register, which is around financial sustainability. This is heightened this year with the impact of the government's fair funding proposals and our need to look at how we deliver services in order to avoid financial crisis in the coming years. Also, the government's announcement of SEND system reforms has been delayed until 2026, bringing uncertainty to the safety fire arrangements, which we've set aside the £23 million in reserves to meet our share of the rising deficit. Our annual budgeted spending on day-to-day services totals £305 million, of which 54% is spent on education, over 17% is spent on adult social care, and 7.2% on children's social care. If we exclude the £165 million school spending, which is mostly funded by the Dedicated Schools Grant, we spend 38% of our revenue budget on adult social care and 16% on children's. Waste management accounts for 6%. All of these services are statutory and are experiencing demand pressures, and highlights that we can't easily change a lot of what we spend our money on, or at least in the short term. This makes it difficult to make cuts to services, hence our focus on looking at all services the council offers and looking differently at how they can be delivered. The council's business change and corporate improvement programmes continue to underpin delivery of the council plan, supporting financial sustainability, service improvement and organisational resilience. They also represent the other areas of my portfolio, including HR and procurement. It has 5 programmes that are open, and we have closed 2 programmes over the course of the year. Of the programmes that are open, workforce retention and recruitment has surpassed its savings target in year 1, achieving £2.8 million of savings of agency spend against a target of £1 million. We have seen improved stability of the workforce, although some challenges remain with children's and adult social care. We have also launched a new manager behaviour framework and EDI toolkit. In neighbourhood regeneration and assets, disposal of assets in year 1 provided just under £1.5 million of capital receipts used to support transformation activity, and work has progressed on the demolition of the High Street car park to enable that site to be redeveloped in the future. Digitalisation and efficiency has undergone a few iterations and is now focused on efficiencies that can be achieved through the use of Copilot, which has delivered £250,000 savings this year, with a further £250,000 in 26-27. We also delivered the Digital Spring Clean, which provided a clearer picture of different business applications in use across the organisation. Council-wide financial management has seen a major upgrade of Aggresso successfully achieved with testing on web functionality that has become the default software well underway. Our financial operating model has been reviewed with input from workshops with budget holders, and training for budget managers is also being delivered. Send improvement does remain within corporate improvement portfolio, supported by the business change team, and the Send Priority Action Plan and Improvement Plan has been developed and approved by DFE and NHS England. The Safety Valve programme continues to deliver in line with the agreement, and we have opened the new SEMH special school at its temporary site, and a new SRP at Edgebarrow School opened in September. We have received no further update on the new autism special school, which is a DFE-led project. The rate of growth in demand for EHCPs is reducing, however, the cost of out-of-borough school placements is continuing to increase and our deficit is still growing. Throughout the year, we have closed the council-wide procurement programme and climate change staff actions. The procurement programme to support the changes from the Procurement Act has seen us review and update all standard documentation, streamline procurement processes and guidance documents, and update our contract register and procurement pipeline. Essential procurement training packages have been developed and rolled out, as well as supporting materials been updated. This has been a success of the Corporate Improvement Programme, giving it the focus and governance that it needed. The Climate Change Staff Actions Programme was closed in June and has launched 2 new e-learning modules with high completion rates, and carbon literacy training has been delivered using a train-the-trainer model to support wider rollout. We also launched the Electric Vehicle Salary Sacrifice Scheme, which is delivering savings in this financial year, as well as helping reduce vehicle emissions. As we look ahead to setting next year's budget, we are progressing through the timeline of activities that we follow each year. Over the past few weeks, we've been reviewing proposals as Cabinet that have been put forward for us to consider to achieve the savings we need over the next 3 years. As Stuart has said earlier, the potential changes from the Fair Funding Review are profound for Bracknell Forest, and we are having to look at how we deliver services differently, a wholesale, radically different approach to previous years in order to meet the challenge we face. It is frustrating that, having normally received the policy statement earlier this month, that we are not expected to receive it until later in November, and this means we continue to work with uncertainty. Since the consultation over the summer, we have continued our lobbying efforts through contact with the previous and current Ministers for Communities, Houses and Local Government, local MPs and the LGA. There has been speculation on the outcome of the Fair Funding Review, and we are perhaps hopeful of an improved position for Bracknell Forest, but we must also remain realistic in our planning efforts. It is a difficult position to find ourselves in as a Labour administration with a Labour government. We must also recognise that in Bracknell we are now a minority group, and will be looking to work with other groups in order to achieve a budget that can be supported by Council. This presents both opportunities to invite the views and participation of other groups, but is also difficult with the funding envelope we expect to be operating within, and also the timeline for decision making. We must ensure we maintain an open channel of communication and work together for the benefit of residents. As always, consultation will be important as we set out the context and listen to residents. We will be looking to hold public in-person events during the consultation period, as we have done in previous years, and will be keen to channel feedback through the portal to ensure residents' views are captured and not lost in social media comments. We will also be continuing our comms campaign on how council tax money is spent to help residents understand where their money goes and why we are having to make the changes that we are. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Members, I just saw Councillor Forster.
Could you, relatively straightforward question. So I work in the IT industry, and I've never seen savings like that on Copilot. That's. Could you give us a little bit more details? It's quite frankly amazing. It's £250,000 this year, with a further 250, and next year it's £500,000. Genuinely, if we have managed that, we have done something truly special. But if you could give me some more details.
This is one of the situations where Could we point to exactly where the efficiencies were to take people out? No, but we did recognise that many parts of the organisation had benefited from the impact of that. Managers, administrators, PAs, etc. were all benefiting. So therefore, corporate management team took the pragmatic view that we'll never be able to take out arms and legs of people. So therefore, we just looked at what we felt was the scale of the overall efficiency that we would see, and that was allocated across service areas, and it's now down to the service areas to think how they reorganise themselves to actually manage with that less funding. So that's the reality of how we faced it.
Yes, please.
Sorry, does that lead to the need for less people to work, to less staffing, if you like?
Yes, Councillor, if the staffing budgets are reduced, which they have been, then there will be fewer staff in the years ahead. That's the reality. That is unfortunately the position that we are in.
Thank you.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you. Conscious that a fair bit's been said about reshaping services. History would say that you can try and pull together a new service model, but you don't generally, reap the benefits of those changes until later down the pathway. And clearly it's not going to be possible to fund an existing structure through. So in terms of how we approach this, how are we going to try and sort of smooth the transition from one model to the next when we actually haven't got the money to do it? Do you know what I mean? How do we make that happen? Because it's very challenging for everyone, because we're actually reliant on a lot of organisations, a lot of different people to adopt a different way of thinking, and I'm not entirely sure they're going to have much more money than we have. So it's just almost like the logistics and the expectation we can set with residents through through the consultation and discussion period as to how we might do that, because it does seem quite a big ask.
So one of the big changes that we've had to face into as part of the budget planning this year is the fact that we move into a 3-year settlement, 3-year cycle, which has been a sort of shift, I think, for the organisation to be able to think like that, rather than just sort of, the in-year or 1-year settlement looking ahead. So that's definitely been something that we've had to focus on as an organisation, to sort of think differently in that way. I think it's fair to say that our thinking is evolving as we move through the next few months and years, obviously, as we sort of adapt to new ways of doing things. I think, as we referenced, the sort of there's lots of things in play that will help us to think about how we deliver things in future. So the community strategy is a big one, which I think will help us look at, how we deliver services differently, how we work together with those organisations. So I think it's not just a budget question, but it's that wholesale approach to, how we work differently, basically. Yeah. Okay.
Got Councillor Eggleston next, and then Councillor Eberly.
Thank you for your presentation. So my overall question is that we're basically going to rely on volunteers and services to help step in. Like Stuart rightly said, we do have pockets of deprivation. What I'm really worried about is that deprivation is going to grow, and those people are going to be the ones to suffer the most, because their services may be withdrawn, and the volunteers, their goodwill may very well run out within 3 years of having to support, and they might not be in a position financially to give up their time anymore. Have we got a safety blanket to ensure that those already in the deprived areas are not going to end up any worse off under this budget, please?
I think in terms of the view of sort of the voluntary sector and that element, that is one element. That's not the only direction of travel. That is something that will play into the wider thinking and the wider sort of plans. So that's something that will feed into how we look at delivering services. Obviously we've acknowledged that Bracknell is on the whole, you know, a very well-off area. But, you know, obviously, you know, we will always look to protect the most vulnerable in society, and, you know, nothing that we do will you know, be detrimental to any, you know, to people that are in that category. So, yeah.
Thank you. So just a quick supplementary. So we have got something to fall back on to protect those people if the worst comes to the worst, financially.
I mean, I think what you're asking is how we deliver the services. So, you know, those that are the most vulnerable, you know, they're our primary customer, you know, as a council in many areas of services service delivery. So, you know, they will remain so for us.
Thank you, Councillor Neal, for the presentation. Thank you, Stuart, also for your presentation. I found that quite helpful and illustrative. And it's good to note that for the current funding period, the 2025-2026, we're actually doing quite well, it appears, all concerned, and given all the pressures we had over the year. My question is, well, 2026-2027, we are projecting a deficit of £6.79 million, I believe, if I have the number memorized correctly or noted down correctly. So, Councillor Neal, is the intention to cover this deficit by, simply by drawing on the reserves, or is that are we prepared to make cuts in what we plan to do? And if so, do you have any thoughts about what these cuts might be? A cunning plan?
I wish there was a cutting plan. So I think we've sort of talked about lots of different things this evening in terms of how we plan to look at the next few years ahead. So use of reserves is one of them, as Stuart covered in his presentation. That is you know, a tool that we have to be able to sort of balance each year. But obviously, as we all know, they can only be spent once. So we need to look at our kind of, you know, medium to long term sustainability in terms of how we're offering services and how we are delivering. I think it's fair to say, and we say it every year as part of the budget, everything's on the table and until it's off the table, sort of thing. And I think never more so than this year, where, you know, we are looking at all service areas, and I think, as we've said, looking at doing things differently. So this isn't about, you know, there isn't a lot of fat to trim. It's not about salami slicing and, you know, cutting things here and there. This is about how do we radically think differently about how we deliver for residents and how we deliver our services within the sort of the funding envelope that we've got, and that involves looking, you know, different service models, at, you know, different commercial arrangements. You know, it's not just about cutting services, but it's about how we deliver.
But that process is still ongoing, this decision making and decision finding.
Yeah, so we're in the budget setting cycle for this year at the minute, or for next year. But as we sort of referenced earlier, we're obviously moving to a 3-year cycle as well. So as well as considering what we need to do next year, we are also thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead in terms of what our settlement looks like and what we need to do in those years.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Mackenzie Boyle next.
Thank you very much. Following on from Councillor Ebley, one word, borrowing, will you?
I didn't hear what you said.
Borrow.
So it's an option, but obviously with borrowing comes an impact on our revenue services as well. You know, everything's on, as I said, everything's on the table at the minute. We know what our options are. It's, you know, it could be used for certain things, but obviously not for everything. So it's not a no, but it's what would it be used for?
So how far up the ladder is borrowing then?
I mean, I think in terms of looking at proposals for next year, there's nothing jumping out at me in terms of, you know, that's a key strategy that we've got at the minute. Obviously, there will be elements where we would need to, such as the capital programme and, you know, what we want to look at within that. But I wouldn't say it's come further up the ladder than it has done previous years.
I've got Councillor Forster, then Councillor Barnard.
the safety valve part of our current predicament, and the 23 million that we have, how much risk are we prepared to make, recognising fair funding 2.0 is so hideous, in the way that we treat the reserves that we've got and the steps that we may wish to do independently of the safety valve settlement to get us out of it? How much risk are we as an authority recognising the clamps that safety valve has upon us, and but the opportunities it may give us in terms of that sizable amount? Are we willing to go?
So I think we've recognised this evening that obviously there's been, we haven't had the school come forward from the DFE. Obviously the SEND reforms that the government, we're expecting the government to bring forward, have been delayed. So there does remain a high level of uncertainty in terms of what that might look like. I think from our perspective, we, would be looking to have conversations with ministers and with the DFE about how can we use that money differently. So just what I think, so I know Councillor Watts asked a question earlier about what response we've had from ministers from our lobbying efforts. We've had responses back. One of the responses that we got from Alison McGovern basically said that no local authority should be worse off than where they currently are. So, we will go back to ministers when we know what our settlement looks like based on that statement. And one of the things that we might be asking for is, what differently can we do with that £23 million of reserves because of, everything that's changing.
Thank you.
So, I guess my questions are linked. And the first part goes back to Councillor Eggleston's comment. I noticed in the slides that there was also something in there about, reducing not the quality of service, but maybe sort of some level of access. So if I take adult social care, is consideration being given to tighten up eligibility criteria that might make it harder to access that? That's one question. The second is, highlighted in presentations that we've not seen the significant increase, though we have seen some in children's social care and things. That's because of the sort of early intervention and prevention work, which is hard to quantify in terms of its yield, but it's important. So is there some guidance and commitment, one, on early intervention prevention, that still remains key to our strategy? And secondly, are we looking at actually not just changing the model, but eligibility and access? Because again, that's a very difficult conversation to have with people. And I'm worried that if we get clarity on the safety valve, but it happens too late, that we actually make changes before we know what we can do. Do you see what I mean? That we're in this sort of almost catch-22 situation, that we might not ultimately have to do something, but by the time that we hear we might not have to do something, we've done it. Yeah, and one of the principal tenets that we've had to have through the planning cycle, with the amount of uncertainty that we've got as well, is what we can't afford to do is make decisions now, which may come back to haunt us in future, based on information that we have now or don't have. So that is, what we, especially with social care, as you say, we can't afford to take decisions now about access or, service provision, especially with early intervention and prevention, that will then cause us problems later down the line. Or exactly. So that is something that we're very mindful of in the planning. I think just on your first point, it's too early to say, I think at the minute, any detailed proposals, but yeah, principally that's what we're working to.
Thank you. I've got what I think are 2.5 questions. The first question is, and you'll have to forgive me because I simply can't remember, we entered into a 25-year PFI contract in terms of waste management. I can't remember when that PFI contract is scheduled to come to an end.
2033, I'm reliably informed.
Okay, so we've got some way off before we need to start thinking about the cost that might.
If I may come in, Chair, the work has already started, and Kevin Gibbs at the end of the table there is heavily involved in that because it takes many, many years to re-procure such a complex contract. So that was already started.
Right. So my half question then, and maybe I need to ask Kevin this question, or you, Stuart, I don't know. At what point will we know the extra financial pressures the renegotiation of that contract may well impact or when it may impact the council?
The Exec Director for Communities is more closely involved, so I'm happy to defer to him on that, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. The RE3 partners have been in shadow working for about 2.5 years, working on that piece of work. We have engaged part of Treasury to work with us to help bring that contract back to life, but also recognising that it needs to live within the envelope that has already been set. So although the PFI borrowing against those assets will come to an end in 2033, those assets aren't at the end of life. So there's an opportunity for a period of time to sweat those assets, having paid for those, but with recognition that there's going to be a point that we need to re-provide those. The Strategic Authority gives an opportunity to think about how do we do that on a wider footprint, and I've certainly been lobbying for waste disposal to be done a much bigger footprint and keep waste collection a very local service. So it's not within the Mayoral Strategic Authority remit at the moment, but clearly it makes more sense for a large area to go to the market to buy waste disposal and recycling facilities rather than for us as a local authority to try and do that on our own.
Okay, but we may hear more about that in the near future. Thank you very much, Kevin. My second that was for 1.5. This is my second question. Councillor Neal, you talked about, given the current composition of the council, obviously having to work collaboratively in the interests of the residents. Can you just expand on how you'd like to do that?
So it's a difficult question for me to answer in that it won't be me that's taking it forward, as you know. But, you know, obviously we have sort of formal processes where we have group briefings and leaders briefings and all of that kind of stuff. But what, you know, we will like to do is to be able to talk to groups quite openly about the proposals that are coming forward. And obviously Labour group included as well, as always, but, you know, looking to sort of have a two-way channel of communication about what that might look like. And, yeah, you know, even this evening, sort of people have put forward ideas and suggestions that are welcome and, you know, sort of two heads are better than one. So it will be, you know, it's worthwhile us all working together, I think. But in terms of what it's actually going to look like, as I say, it's not going to be me, so it's sort of quite difficult for me to lay out.
Thank you. Any more questions, Councillor Barnard?
Yeah, I think just to follow on from your question, I think it's very welcome that we're going to have an opportunity as a council to consider this, because this is, you know, I think it's way beyond a party political issue. What I think would be really helpful is if, as part of those discussions, a very clear framework is laid out in terms of information that will be shared, how it will be shared, you know, what that means, because I think there has to be an element of trust and understanding that if there is a more open and discursive dialogue, that information that's shared as part of that process.
I think this is more like you're formulating some sort of recommendation than asking a question.
Well, the question is, do you agree? No, it's not just to say we need to do this, but I think if it can be done, then that will, I think, give residents an understanding why that this is an element of appropriate confidentiality through a process. And secondly, that actually it means that information sharing and idea exchange can be as radical as it needs to be, because it is very different from past years, I think, you know. But I think there needs to be a framework, and my question to you is, can we frame a recommendation that allows our officers, in conjunction with the Cabinet and whoever, to actually work this through, please?
I don't think you need to answer that, Councillor Neal. It may have been a
Sorry,
rhetorical question.
yeah.
Right. If there are no more questions, we can then move into debate. And I think, Councillor Barnard, if you want to try and briefly put that into a format that could be a recommendation to go to the Cabinet, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So my recommendation is to welcome the Cabinet member now and the future Cabinet member during that year desire to work collaboratively and constructively with groups in the preparation of a challenging budget, and that to ensure that that is actually carried out properly, and that in a framework, you know, around collegiate confidentiality, trust around the exchange of information is undertaken, that members therefore be bound by those codes they need to, and that it's recognised until the budget's published. Those discussions need to take place, because it would be most unfortunate if there was a breach of that information in this process, and there has to be, I think, a shared understanding of trust through that.
Well, I'm just going to try and paraphrase Councillor Barnard, if I may. Okay. Can we say that that the recommendation from the Overview Scrutiny Commission is that we look to the Cabinet to devise a collaborative framework around which the political parties can work together in framing a budget that meets the needs of the residents of Bracknell Forest? Does that sound reasonable? Have I missed anything? No, Councillor. All right. Okay. Fine. Okay. Shall we vote on that recommendation? Okay, that's agreed. Do we want to make any other recommendations, Councillor Forster?
Mike. Safety valve is so critical to the future of the financial security of our council that we should recommend the development of contingency plans, if they're not already in place, to how we will react to a number of scenarios around the safety valve settlement.
Forgive me, but I believe we have already made that recommendation once before when this came up, that if there was no response to the letter, we were going to go to Councillor Tina's suggestion that we talk to the builders, the people who could build the school. There was a recommendation that we have a plan B, basically. I don't remember the exact wording.
It will be broader than that. That's one contingency plan in it. You're
that
entirely
is one,
right. Yeah,
and I'm happy to second your idea.
There are others that I'm just saying. Safety valve is such a swing item for us. The development of contingency plans.
For the sake of the officers, can you just perhaps briefly summarise that?
I can do that.
You've fallen into the Barnard.
I have, yeah.
That's it, isn't it?
The Commission recommends that the Council. The Commission recommends. The Commission recommends the development of contingency plans that relate to the safety valve settlement in order to prepare the Council for both positive and negative outcomes.
Councillor Watts.
Could we perhaps, if there isn't already something previously, when we look at it, specifically a part that looks at the Bucklers Park budget as well? But happy to second Councillor Forster's.
Well, let's put Councillor Forster's recommendation first, and then we can deal with the second part separately. Is that agreed by members?
Yes.
Okay. And Councillor Watts, I think your point is well made, and I think it deserves to be a separate recommendation to the Cabinet. So do you want to just encapsulate that in?
Basically, we absolutely need a plan B, because Bucklers Park had all our hopes and dreams resting on it. We were expecting it, we were planning around it, and then suddenly it was, snatched away. I have never been too happy with the DV grant, because it was never particularly specific, and obviously we've had changes, so we need something solid. But also we need to look at Bucklers Park. We need something as a plan B. If they are not going to provide it, they can't provide a budget, we need to find a way to do it, because our children need it desperately.
there's a specific contingency. The Commission recommends a specific contingency plan relating to the Butlers provision of the Butlers Park Send school.
I'm happy to second that, Chair, because I think gave that one to effect. So happy to second.
Right. So are we all content that the Cabinet is urged to have Plan B in relation to Butlers Park, but obviously the wording is as per Councillor Watts. Are we all content with that? Sorry, Clark, can you just repeat that?
So it was to recommend that Cabinet develop a specific contingency plan relating to the provision of Butlers Park Send School if it's not provided by the DFE.
I would just stop it at before you say if not provided by. Yeah. So yeah.
Are members content with that?
Yes.
Okay, all show please if you're content. That's agreed. Okay. Yeah. Councillor Barnard.
Yeah, Chair, I have what I hope will be a concise recommendation. I said hope. I mean, you know, that the Cabinet be asked to recognise that support of early intervention and prevention services is essential for managing future demand for our services and delivering better outcomes for our residents.
Is that agreed? Okay, so
Is
we
that
have
suitably succinct, Chair?
Impressively so. So I would like to thank all the members for participation in that. I'd like to thank Councillor Neil and Stuart McKellar for attending. Please do feel free to leave, but thank you very much for your participation. Thank you. The remaining item on the agenda is item 8, work programme updates, and I will turn to my right, unusually in these circumstances, the answer Ebele on my right, to give a verbal update on the work of his panel.
Thank you. The update will be provided by Councillor Foster, the Vice Chair of the panel.
So we're making good progress. We have completed 2 modules, which were the first one was looking at policies and planning. Policies. The second one was looking at the planning and developers. The third one we are looking to registered service providers, and we've started interviews with tenants to give some colour to the process that we're going through. And we are now in the process of also preparing the module looking at Bracknell Forest providing our own housing, which is quite an interesting one. And also we've got a conversation with Helen Pennell, who's the executive member responsibilities in this area. And so we're on target to finish this year.
Thank you, Councillor Forster. Councillor Watts, an update, please.
Thank you, Chair. So our review is on track. Recent activity has included further engagement sessions with parents and carers. The questionnaire discourse has been resent with some responses already received. We have final meetings coming up, a summary of a review so far, and a final evidence gathering planning next Monday, and meeting with Cabinet Member for Children and Young People, followed by a private recommendation meeting. Thank you.
And then Councillor Eggleston.
Thank you. So as it stands at the moment, we're still waiting for a start date for our health in all policies, which we believe should be December time. Myself and Councillor Virgo have had no update from the JHOSC yet. We expected something by the end of October. But I have had a meeting with Councillor Wright, so I'll try and trim this down the best as I can. There will be a reduction in public health funding for the next financial year. We're looking at obviously next April, where Frimley becomes the Thames Valley ICB from April the 1st. So we're going to see what priorities, financial balance, how strategically it's going to work. Winter planning is on track. The Pegasus exercise highlighted IPC training and timely SAGE updates. We haven't got an opening date for Skimpy Hill as yet. They're looking at social prescribing. There's going to be a consultation to perhaps stop public health social prescribers to reduce silo working. I think the real thing we need to look at that is that community connectors, which deal with the mental health side, whereas social prescribers deal with the physical health side, that we still sort of offer some sort of service for them. The Bridgewell is fully open with the fire system issues resolved. The transformation, new carers strategy is currently being implemented. The NRS liquidation is managed locally. The main issue is uncollected equipment, which is currently under review. That took over from the company who used to lend. Yes. Aids and
Councillor Barnard.
adaptations.
I was asking what the NRS sorry, Chair.
Through the chair.
Yes. So, housing and health side of things, Councillor Wright is seeking AWAB's law and decent home standard to be added to her portfolio due to the fact its health ramifications, which makes absolutely sense. We spoke about how Councillor Wright showcased Bracknell's work on carers, stressed natural gap for young adult carers and upcoming local initiatives. So yeah, it's been very busy all round. We're just waiting for things sort of to be finished off and more clarity, to be honest with you. Thank you.
I think we'd all like more clarity about most things. But can I thank the panel chairs, vice chairs, for their contribution to that item. There isn't any other business on the agenda for this evening, so therefore I'd like to thank all of you for attending. I'd like to declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. I meant to say I'd also like to thank